Welcome to Crazy Biatch Asians. This is a podcast where we discuss the issues Asians can face in the Western world with a critical mind, a bit of healthy debate, and lots of tea. Hosted by digital marketer Sharon Jiang and journalist Juna Zhu.
Hey friends. As you may have heard, a huge surge of violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders is happening across the globe, particularly in the US. Spurred on by the racist notion of the China virus, anyone who looks Asian seems to be the target against racial abuse, both verbal, physical, and at its worst, fatal. We're addressing the issue today in hopes of spreading the word to stop Asian hate.
We are heartbroken and devastated.
Yeah, our hearts are yearning in grief. In a time when we should all be turning to one another for support as we battle through mental challenges, the pandemic amplified this long history of racism towards Asian people. As two proud Asian Australians who are now fearful of what the future holds, we definitely felt like we needed to address this issue. It's only through educational conversation in which we can hopefully put an end to this before it spirals out of control. We need to fulfill our duty as humans and play our part in stopping Asian hate. While this has been an ongoing issue, it was the latest surge of absolutely horrific mass shootings in Atlanta on the Asian community that was the real earthquake that shook the world. It just highlighted the painful reality of the rising anti-Asian violence around the world.
Yes, so for those who aren't across it, on March 16th, 2021, 8 people, 6 of them being Asian American women, were killed at 3 spas in Atlanta, Georgia. The victims were Soon Chong Park, 74, Hyun John Grant, 51, Sun Cha Kim, 69, Yong A Yue, 63, Tan Xiao Jie, 49, Feng Dao You, 44, Delana Ashley Yorn, 33, and Paul Andre Michels, 54. A white 21-year-old man by the name of Robert Aaron Long was arrested within hours of the attacks and charged with 8 counts of murder. But one problem arose. The police asserted that the shooter was not racially motivated, a statement that was met with widespread criticism and disdain. It promoted widespread debate over what constitutes a hate crime, and if this wasn't, then what is the explanation behind the gunman's actions, especially in the context of the recent surge of violence against Asian Americans?
Yes, so off this, what is the actual definition of a hate crime?
According to the New South Wales Police, a hate crime is, quote, a criminal offence motivated against persons that is motivated in whole or in part by an offender's hate against an individual or group's actual or perceived race, religion, ethnic or national origin, sex or gender, gender identity, age, disability status, sexual orientation, or homeless status. So NGOs usually define racist violence as, quote, racially motivated criminal acts against the person and or property, and include public insults and defamation, threats, and incitement to racial violence, hatred, or discrimination.
However, there is a problem. The narrow legal definition of what constitutes a hate crime makes it really hard to charge and convict in the US, as pointed out in an article on The Conversation. Janine Bell, who is a professor of law at the Mora School of Law, Indiana University, has studied hate crime and police for over 20 years. And she says that charging people with a hate crime presents additional layers of complexity to what may otherwise be a straightforward case for prosecutors. Bias motivation can be hard to prove, and prosecutors can be reluctant to take cases that they may not win in court. Bell summed up the dilemma perfectly. So she wrote, hate crime laws reflect American ideals of fairness, justice, and equity. But if crimes motivated by bias aren't reported, well investigated, charged, or brought to trial, it matters little what state law says. So now that we've discussed that, I think it's really important we address where this is all stemming from. Why are Asians being targeted now?
Yeah, okay. But I just want to say, we want to structure this in the way that we present the facts to you, and then we're going to have a discussion.
Yes.
So we're going to reserve all the venting for later. So Why is this happening? Racism against Asians has always existed in modern history, from the Yellow Peril to the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 in the US, and also on our home soil, Pauline Hanson's infamous idea that Australia is being swamped by Asians. But the recent escalation of hate crimes is largely because of Trump's racist political rhetoric of the China virus. So Karthik Ramakrishnan, professor of public policy and political science at the University of California, said in an interview with NBC Asian America that former President Donald Trump's continued emphasis that the coronavirus originated in China plays a huge part in fostering this hate.
Yeah, exactly. And a Time article worded it perfectly. So it said, President Trump repeatedly referred to COVID-19 as the China virus, blaming the country for the pandemic. In doing so, Trump followed in a long American history of using diseases to justify anti-Asian xenophobia, one that dates back to the 19th and 20th centuries and has helped to shape perceptions of Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners. Although the pandemic has highlighted the prevalence of anti-Asian racism, it is certainly a part of long history of exclusion, mistrust, and stereotyping of the Asian community, which the pandemic has only exacerbated. The Atlanta shooting has had a ripple effect on the Asian diaspora worldwide, because we know deep down inside that this isn't just a problem occurring in America. The rise in hate crimes targeting Asian communities has become global. The Australian National University study of more than 3,000 people found 84.5% of Asian Australians reported at least one instance of discrimination between January and October of 2020. That's more than 8 in 10 Asian Australians reporting discrimination.
That is a majority of people reporting racism and discrimination. So we can't even say that it's not happening on our soil, because it is. In New Zealand, research by the New Zealand Human Rights Commission released in February 2021 found around half of the Chinese respondents had experienced discrimination since the start of the pandemic, and also half of Maori respondents had also faced discrimination.
Wow.
To make matters worse, there has also been an increase in reports coming from Canada, Italy, Russia, and Brazil, according to the Human Rights Watch.
Yeah, now in the UK, where COVID is pretty big, police data has suggested a rise of 300% in hate crimes towards East and Southeast Asians at the beginning of 2020 compared to the same period in 2018 and 19. According to the Time report, quote, over the past year in the UK, Chinese takeaway owners have reported being spat at and attacked. Nurses of East and Southeast Asian heritage working in the National Health Services have reported incidents of racial abuse from patients, and people of East and Southeast Asian descent have been victims of violent and racial aggravated street attacks.
Oh my God.
That's a lot to consume.
Like, hearing you read that is just making me really upset. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to hold it in until the discussion section.
Spat at and attacked.
Literally. The big statistics, as we know, are in the US. A report from California State University examined hate crimes in 16 of America's largest cities. The report found that anti-Asian hate crimes increased by nearly 150% in 2020, with hotspots in New York and Los Angeles. I think it's interesting how it's happening in quite progressive and liberal big cities. New York and LA, they pride themselves in being liberal.
Yeah.
That scares me a bit. And hate crimes in the US are more violent in nature, escalating over time. Like you said about the UK, in the US, Asians are being spat at, yelled racial slurs. Also, elderly Asian people are being fatally attacked on the street, unprovoked. Literally just pushed from behind, and because they're elderly, a lot of them pass in the moment. And of course, 8 people shot dead in a horrific shooting. While the physical violence hasn't reached Aussie shores, the casual racism is still evident. So we talked about the research coming from Australian National University. It's still evident. Casual racism has always been a thing in Australia. So these include verbal abuse and threats, being spat at, racial slurs, and it also disproportionately affects international students and recent migrants.
In fact, we actually opened up the conversation on Instagram and asked our listeners to send in their own stories of racism. And we received more than we actually initially predicted.
And it was really sad reading through some of these.
Yeah.
So we just wanted to share some with all of you. Sabrina from Australia spoke about the racial slurs she received after Corona happened. She said, quote, "A random man on the train told me that I caused the coronavirus because my people eat bats, then told me to go back to my country. I am from Canada." It feels like we're passing the racial hate baton from the huge Black Lives Matter movement last year to AAPI this year. Who's the next victim of white supremacy?
Exactly.
That's a really good
It's a
point.
whole repeat of what happened last year, just to another race of people.
100%, 100%.
So a second person who shared their experience wishes to remain anonymous. They're from the US, and she pointed out the racism she's experienced in the workplace and her lack of power in talking back due to the need to maintain professionalism. She said, "I worked most of this pandemic in a customer service role. While not directed at me, a lot of people have been purchasing items from China and would say things such as, 'I would have never ordered this if I knew it came from China. It probably has coronavirus on it.' When they would talk about one of my colleagues from India or the Philippines, 1, the accent was almost always mentioned in a negative tone. 2, they frequently implied or said my colleagues didn't speak English or couldn't do their jobs. 3, berate my company for hiring foreigners." Now, this bit is the kicker. She goes on to say, "We have no policies that empower workers to stand against this stuff during a call."
We thought this one was important to share because she spoke about racism in the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's hard to maintain your professionalism when you're getting told those things.
Exactly. Where
Yet-
does it cross the line?
Exactly.
When you can speak back and
Exactly.
stand up for yourself.
And she said she was powerless because her workplace had no policies. So they just had to sit back and take it, which is the sad bit. So a third person who wrote in, her name is Tan. She's from Australia and she had a similar experience with COVID racial slurs. This seems to be coming up a lot. She said, "An old man from across the car park pointed and yelled at me, 'You fucking Chinese virus.' I was just trying to get to Kmart." So we've chosen not to bleep out any of the swear
No.
words because we want this to have the maximum impact because that was what was said to her. Swearing. Saying the F word.
I'm just speechless.
I know. So we've presented all the facts and figures about this issue. So now we've reached the discussion point of the episode, and I feel like this is where we can really let loose and have a bit of a back and forth discussion about how we've been feeling from this event. I feel like this whole thing has touched me on a very personal level. When we were doing a lot of the research and the scripting for this, I've actually been pretty distraught and I've had a bit of a cry to myself during the research of this whole thing. Looking at a lot of the news reports and what's been happening, I felt quite sick. Like my gut felt like I needed to puke. Starting with the Thai man that was pushed, to the Asian lady that fought back her attacker. Some of these videos have just been a lot to watch.
Just seeing it all on social media as well. My
100%.
Facebook feed is just constantly about news articles. What's all these old people being pushed and
100%.
being hurt, and physically hurt.
Yeah. The most cowardly thing you can do is to target an elderly person who cannot fight back. One of the reasons why it's affected me personally is because my mum was actually targeted.
Yeah.
And I am honestly a little bit concerned and a little bit scared, although the other half of me does have a lot of faith in Australia. So my mum received a 2-page long racist letter in which the author vented about her hatred towards Chinese people in capital letters. The whole letter was in caps, basically. So I'm going to read you out a little snippet, but I'm not going to read the whole thing, obviously. You might want to brace yourself. You are the dirtiest kind of people in the world. You brought over your Chinese diseases with you, but you want to ignore the fact that it is all your fault. Take a hint, you are not fucking welcomed in this country. I do not give a fuck if you are born here or not. You are the Chinese-infested disease and pests of society. So the letter is about 1,000 words, 2 pages long, or to that effect. Just saying, fuck you, like fucking Chinese people, you're a disease, go back to your own country, that kind of thing.
And stressed all in caps lock.
Yeah, all in caps lock. So for context, this letter has been passed on to the Australian police. Legally, I can talk about it, but it is under investigation. It wasn't just my mum who received it though. Every other Asian Australian politician in New South Wales and local government also received the same letter.
Sitting here and having you explain that again, like you showed me that letter a few weeks ago, and reading it, I was in disbelief at what I was reading.
100%.
Thinking, oh, this is just a joke or something.
Yeah.
But knowing that this is a reality that not just your mum, how many letters of this same copy was sent to how many people? Who has the time to put in this amount of effort to send to how many people? This makes me feel so sick.
I know. They put so much effort into this.
I'm actually speechless, and I've got goosebumps, and
I don't know if things are going to get physical in Australia, and I hope not. And I want to have faith in Australia, but also when this happened to my mum, I'm like, who the fuck is this person?
For me, this whole process, I've just had trouble digesting it all, and I still can't fathom that this is reality.
Yeah.
Because yes, I've been seeing everything that's been happening in the US, but now it's hitting close to home. And it's something that I will never be able to comprehend. We are all humans, regardless of where this virus came from, who it came from, what it came from. What good is it going to do if we just pinpoint it on a specific racial group?
Yeah.
Like in a time like this, we should all be taking steps forward so we can return to a new normal life. But instead, we're constantly being faced with problems like this. Last year it was Black Lives Matter, and we're just delaying the process of returning back to life.
We're delaying humanity moving forward.
Exactly.
We're going backwards. Why are we going backwards?
Bringing out the worst in us.
Yeah.
We're just becoming barbaric animals. I just don't understand why people can't get this through their heads.
I feel like in times like this, language is super important, especially when it comes from a world leader, or in this case, a previous world leader. So in my view, presidents and prime ministers, they should be a role model. They should be a moral compass in which people look up to them for what is right and wrong in the world, for morality.
It's a direct reflection of what's happening in their country.
Oh my God, 100%. 100%. It's very fragmented. And when Trump says something so flippantly, that has obviously had a huge effect on certain US citizens, because they see their hero, Donald Trump, saying China virus. They're also going to think, oh my God, yeah, you're so right. Like, fuck them. And if they're a somewhat violent person, they might act out on it. And it's not just in the US. My mum got this letter from someone who obviously lives in Australia. And they've obviously heard Trump's rhetoric in order to write the whole letter saying, you Chinese people have caused the coronavirus, you're all fucking diseased. Like, can't we get it across our head that what world leaders say have such a big impact? Yeah. Even though he's out of office, this lasting effect is going on.
Yeah.
It's still happening.
Yeah. He still has influence on a lot of people.
100%. And he's changed the mindset of so many people. The racists prior to Donald Trump is only now more racist because of Donald Trump. Yeah. Then how do you reverse that mindset? That's going to take generations.
The only way to phase this out now is to overpower Trump's words.
Exactly.
So that is, again, spreading the word and getting it out to people that this is not the answer to solving anything.
Exactly. The second thing that we want to raise is that in the US, there's this massive model minority myth. The model minority idea is that Asians achieve a high level of success and enter a very high income bracket, which means that they've somehow overcome discrimination. But it's evident in the light of these events that is such a myth. If Asians don't encounter discrimination, why the fuck is this happening?
Yeah.
Why are we discussing this here today? How do you break down this myth and how do you retune the conversation?
Yeah.
And I think the whole world coming together on social media, through the media, people covering this event is really trying to shed light on the discrimination and racism that Asians do face. And I think this is a personal thing that I'd like to share. I sometimes get the feeling that Asians are really welcome for economic reasons in Western countries. So for example, when a Western country needs their economy supported, the borders are open to skilled migrants. So Western countries say, Asians come in here, we need like accountants, we need doctors, we need all these skilled people. And then when a crisis happens, it's like racism, discrimination comes back like twofold.
Yeah, that is very true.
Yeah.
Another point that I do want to raise is gender stereotypes, which was very much stressed in the Atlanta shootings. So it perpetuates this idea that Asian women are sexual objects and that they are fetishized imaginations in people's minds.
Yeah.
So the Atlanta shooter, he had a sex addiction, and for him to target females of Asian race, it says something. There's a message there.
Exactly.
Don't you find it ironic that a few days beforehand the world was celebrating International Women's Day, and then days later something like this happened, targeting women?
100%.
And it was just overlooked.
Exactly. And like, let's talk about that point for a second, because I think this point has been raised a lot in the media. Articles say that the shooting was not racially motivated, but I honestly beg to differ. Because let's look at it like this. He had a sex addiction, and in his words, he shot people to eliminate the temptation. That's what he said. He shot people to eliminate the temptation. So he went to these Asian massage parlors and shot Asian women. Isn't that a bit strange? And I can't say definitively if he has an Asian fetish or something weird with Asian women, but a hate crime is defined as even partially motivated by race. Call it for what it is. He did not have a bad day. He's a fucking psycho.
So there is another really important point that was brought to light by influential power woman and MasterChef Australia judge Melissa Leong. And she shared on her Instagram story this post. It showed the victims' names of the Atlanta shooting, and alongside of it, she wrote, "The sad reality is that many won't see these names as real people who were killed by racial hate because they don't want to learn how to pronounce their names properly." Just let that sink in. Now, we listed the victims of the shooting earlier in this episode. Are you able to recall them now? So talking about what's happening and spreading awareness is only part of the picture. Now it's a matter of fact of communicating what we can do to help this situation and assist in preventing it from spreading globally. How do we move forward, and how do we make a difference?
Yes, this is going to be my favorite part of this episode, because we can come with some positive solutions. So despite the horrific events, there are actions being taken to stop Asian hate. I don't know about you, Juna, but sometimes I feel really useless just sharing a graphic on social media and calling it a day. A lot of people want to make a difference, but don't quite know where to start. And it also warms my heart that recently I've had a lot of non-Asian, so like white Australians or whatever they may be, ask me, how can I help with this? What can I personally do to make you feel safer in this country? And while I don't personally have a blanket solution, I think offering your support, so if you have an Asian friend, check up on them, standing in solidarity with Asians through digital petitions, And above all, calling out racist incidents if and when they happen right in front of you.
Yeah. And it just goes to show the power of social media. So as much as people are just posting about the hate crimes and specifically the Atlanta shooting, people are now going into depth posting about the steps that you can take to help support the Asian community.
Yeah.
So there is a great example by Shit You Should Care About that sums this up perfectly. So they listed 8 steps that you can take. One is to check in on your AAPI friends and loved ones.
Yep.
2, follow and listen to AAPI activists online. 3, contact your representatives and urge them to support legislation that prevents hate crime and discrimination. 4, join a protest. In the case of Australia, you could sign a petition. There are lots on change.org. We will put them in the show notes. 5, report any and all incidents of anti-Asian hate. 6, donate to AAPI organisations and non-profits. Again, we will post these in our show notes. 7, volunteer to help Asian elders in your community. And 8, support local Asian-owned businesses. So these include restaurants, corner shops, cafes, restaurants, agencies, the lot.
Yeah, anything. Exactly.
Yeah. And remember, no contribution or act of support is too small. Every single one of us plays a crucial role in making a difference. Okay, we have barely scraped the surface of this issue. There is a plethora of information and statistics we haven't even covered. We wish we could talk about everything there really is to know, but we are hoping we've been able to start some kind of conversation, especially down under, and help bring to light these acts of barbarity that are occurring overseas.
Exactly. And I think we are extremely fortunate to be living in Australia where these hate crimes aren't as apparent and aren't as violent as they are in the US. However, as we've pointed out, they still occur here. While oceans may separate us from those living in the US and the UK and Canada, we still need to stand in solidarity as one world and stop these crimes from occurring because enough is enough.
Yeah, please spread awareness, check in on your Asian friends, and educate yourself and others on the model minority myth and long history of anti-Asian racism. We need to stop the dehumanization of Asians.
And if you or anyone you know are mentally impacted by this current state of affairs, please know that help is never too far away. If you're in Australia, you can contact Lifeline or Beyond Blue.
On that note, if you'd love to hear more from us, please subscribe to Crazy Biatch Asians on your favourite podcast app. And if you've got a sec, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so we can keep going.
We'd also love to hear from you and your thoughts about this episode and about the situation at large. So please send us an email at crazybiatchasians@gmail.com or you can DM us on Instagram at crazybiatchasians.
Chat soon and sending love to you all. Stop Asian hate.